Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today I have with me a guest expert, Georgie Wisen Vincent, and she has just written a book along with Tina Payne-Bryson about the power of play. It's called The Way of Play. It is coming out very soon. We're going to include a link to pre-order it. I believe it drops January 21st, but I think we're going to talk about that in the interview. And Georgie is also going to introduce herself, so I'll let her do that. But this was a really fun book to read and a really fun interview, and really great to hear all the ways that as parents and caregivers, we can support our children with play. And don't worry, it's not hard. It doesn't have to be hard. If you would like to share this episode with a friend who finds play hard, that would be amazing. As always, we always appreciate any 5-star reviews you can leave us on Spotify or Apple, and make sure to follow the show so that you never miss an episode. Let's go ahead and meet Georgie and hear what she has to say about the power of play and the way of play. Hey, Georgie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sarah. It's really good to be here. Thanks for inviting me to talk to you today.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so excited about the book that you and Tina have written, The Way of Play. But before we get into the book, why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, so I am the founder with Tina Bryson of the Play Strong Institute, which is an organization that's dedicated to the research and development around helping families play together. It's also something that professionals can turn to as a resource when they're learning like how to work with kids who may be struggling with behaviors and emotions and other challenges as they're growing up, along with their parents and caregivers. And I'm doing a whole bunch of not only research into play, but I'm also a play therapist. So I'm a registered play therapist supervisor. And that just means that I've done a whole lot of training to use play to help work with kids and their problems and challenges. And yeah, and I'm doing a PhD at the moment. I don't know if that's interesting to you.
No, that's very cool.
Yeah, I'm always learning.
Yeah. So it is I think you have one child?
Yes, I have a 10-year-old son, Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my dad's a psychologist. And when I was growing up, I used to always say, I'm not your client. Don't psychologize me or whatever.
Yes.
Does your child say, like, don't try to use play therapy on me, Mom?
That's funny. He's a little, I don't know, like a sage. I often feel like he is a collector of wisdom, and in many ways, he's smarter than us.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's sort of a fine line between being a therapist and being a mom. And yes, sometimes I do get reminded about that when we're sort of in the moment, when we're in the thick of it, trying to solve a problem together.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, just talk to me as your mom. Don't talk to me as like, one of your clients. Yeah.
I'm sure that all the children of helping and healing professionals have that feeling one time or another.
Yes.
And I was thinking actually while I was reading your book that it's more than this, but one of the things that it feels like your book is teaching parents to become their children's own play therapist.
Yeah. It's a set of helpful tips for parents. I think that a lot of us, I know I do as a mom, I get a lot of like stuff coming into my inbox, like, the stuff that's going around is largely about how do we make sense of the research on play? Like, play is really important. It's a driver of child development. Kids get a lot of play when they're little, and then maybe less so as they go into the school years. How do we preserve play? How do we use play to minimize screen time and things like that? How do we get them off the screens? I mean, send them out and let them get dirty, all that stuff. But it's really hard to find more information about how parents are meant to do this and how do we really engage our kids without it taking loads and loads of time. How do we achieve all these things that we want to achieve with our kids with us as partners in the process? That's really why we wrote the book. We really wanted to give parents tangible skills that they can sort of just read. There's amazing illustrations in the book as well that just sort of really simplify things. If you're a busy parent like me, I don't have a lot of time to go page after page. And so it makes it really practical. And there are a lot of solutions in those pages as well of how play can really help make parenting a lot easier.
Yeah, and
Which
really
is
great
not something that
examples.
I've seen spoken about that
Yeah.
much before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and really great examples too. I mean, in our community, we do talk a lot about play in terms of, helping you move through your schedule with ease. My
Yeah.
Corey, who works with me, she has all these different characters that she has, like the dental hygienist who brushes the kids' teeth. And so that's something that I know my listeners are really familiar with because we talk about it a lot. But what they're not as familiar with, I think, is what I want to dig into with you in terms of sort of what are the skills that play can as you play with your child, you can help your child develop those skills.
Yeah.
Because you just mentioned that, we hear a lot about how play is so integral for a really healthy childhood, and that's how children learn. But I think you're right that there's this less familiar, and I mentioned how you can make the day easier with play, but I
Yeah.
think it's less familiar that you can actually teach skills through play. So maybe we should dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
You have in your book, which I encourage everybody to get, and it's going to be out very soon, available. I think we said January 21st, but we'll put a link to pre-order the book, and that does help authors get their book out into the world. The more people who pre-order it, the better. So go grab the link and order it. So in your book, you have your 7 play strong strategies. And actually, before we dive into any specific one, I just wanted to comment and get your thoughts on this. So I love that almost every strategy starts with step 1, observe and attune.
Oh,
So maybe you could talk a little
yeah.
bit more about what is observing and attuning and why is that so crucial to all of the different strategies that you talk about?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Sarah. It really goes back to the early days of when I came to work with Tina at the Center for Connection. It's a clinic where a bunch of different professionals come together and they all have their gifts to share families. And mine was play therapy. And I said, we should do this with play. And if you just taught parents how to play in a couple of simple steps, they'd learn to see so much more in this mysterious magic that's taking place in their kids' bodies and brains and what they're discovering as they play. And it can really further kids' learning about their social emotional development, and parents can do. And Tina was like, well, I know a lot about play too, because, she has 3 boys and she's written so much about parenting and harnessing the powers of brain development. So we put our heads together, and really what we came up with was it's not about the amount of time that you spend in play. It's really about seeing something new in your kids' play. So the observe and attune first step of each of the strategies is about helping parents know what to look for as they're playing with their kids. And then you begin to discover play in a new way, and it starts to feel more valuable. It starts to feel more like a vehicle for relationship. Like I can connect with my kid, but the quality of the way that I'm doing it can bring out so much more of the things that we're trying to instill in our kids, and you actually see their wisdom coming through. So the observe and attune is about like a starting point for how to look at play through new eyes. And then we sort of go through the practical steps of now what do you do now that you're starting to see this natural language of kids, this way that they can communicate with us before they can even verbally, take on the words to speak. How can we make the best use of those early years of play and then on through really as our kids are becoming teenagers and they don't want to talk to us as much? It's another way of connecting and relating and keeping, those connections strong even as they get older and they seem less interested in spending time with us too.
Yeah. I love that too, that what you just said, and also that it prevents one of the problems that you mentioned a few times in the book about just barging in and taking over.
Yeah.
Like if you really start with that intentional, like I'm not here to direct the play, I'm not here to manage the play. I'm here to, very first step, observe and attune. I think that sets parents up in the right direction, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you reminded me of something that we emphasize in The Way of Play, the book, which is, there's a lot of different types of play. I'm thinking about parents that are like, I don't really enjoy pretend play. I don't want to be the dental hygienist character, but I'm really good at sort of, building something out of Lego and then looking at the finished product together, something like that. So I just want to say that we're not really advocating that there's one specific way of playing. And I have a neurodivergent child myself, and I know his play looked a lot different than what I was expecting we would play together. But his play was very unique and different than my interests. So it's about opening yourself up to your kids' interests and maybe seeing where you can join without taking over, as you said. The book really helps point out some ways of doing that, because I think we tend to get involved in direct play in the way we think it should go. Like, I'm intentionally or explicitly teaching you skills in your play. Like, I think the character should do this. They shouldn't go down that dark alley. They should avoid that altogether. But that might be an opportunity, actually, that we talk a lot about, which is kids can, through the stories that they tell in their play, they can learn to handle emotions like fear or anxiety or uncertainty, and even take on things that would be dangerous in real life, but just a tiny bit risky in the safety of pretend. And they can learn to manage their emotions differently if we kind of get out of their way in some ways. So the book really teaches how to do that. And I hope it comes across as simple enough that pretty much anybody could understand and start using these strategies practically
Yeah, and I think
right
you
away.
could just dive into dive into one of those strategies that appeals to you, and they're very
Yeah.
clearly laid out steps, and with both the purpose and how to do it. I think it's really brilliant. So I told you
Thanks.
before we started recording that I thought we should dive into two of the strategies and leave something for everyone to learn about when they pick up the book. But the one that I really liked that I thought we could dive into was the play strong strategy number 3, which you just kind of brought us to that place in a nice way, talking about
Yeah.
emotions, but it's bring emotions to life. And so I had a couple of notes that I had written on it. And what I liked about your book too is that for each strategy, you've got the skill that the child learns through this strategy, and then also the message that they get. And so what you wrote was that through number 3, that children learn to recognize, manage, and express emotions, and that's the skill. And then the message that they get is that someone will help me recognize my emotions and make sense of my big feelings. And I just love that. And you said play helps children learn to manage their feelings without having an actual fight or flight stress response. You kind of alluded
Mhm.
to that in the last thing you said. So maybe you could just dig in and give us some examples of how to do this kind of play, and what kids might get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, this is the third strategy of the book, and it's when we get into the way that parents can, you know, join and watch what's unfolding as children begin to reach those stages. When they get a little bit older, they're not like 2 or 3 anymore. They're more into their 3, 4, 5-year-old self, where pretend play starts to become sort of a major focus. But you can do this even before, when kids are super little as well. You start to see that kids live out their feelings in their play in a way that provides what play therapists would call the safety of symbolic distance, when we're talking about, like, now I'm, pretending that we're in a restaurant and a rude customer has just walked through the door, and they're going to complain about that, I don't have the favorite foods on the menu. The food is too hot or too cold. Kids create all these problems scenarios in their play that are just rife with opportunity to help them see, but us to follow along with and join the process of, like, how are we going to deal with all these feelings that are coming up? So bring emotions to life is number 1. Just allow them to express the emotions that are obviously there in the play. So if that is a rude customer that's walking through the door, who's the rude customer going to be? Is it going to be them, or is it going to be you? Some kids love playing the rude character or the mean character, or it's not about encouraging them to be their bad self. or something. But kids do get to explore more emotions than I think they'd be allowed to have at school or grandparents' house or even, I don't know, at the park with us or something. So play offers them like this safe container where it's not a real threat. That's not a real customer threatening to call authorities and shut your restaurant down or something like that. But you do get an encapsulated experience of those emotions. So allow them to have those emotions in their play and then kind of point them out. Like, wow, this customer is really mad and disappointed that we're not offering the special of the day that they want. I'm really getting into the exact, I've spent lots and lots of hours playing with my own kid and other people's kids. So I can't help but bring in real examples of how this will come across, right? So once we start to label what the emotion is, then we're free to play with those emotions. So then we're free to sort of go, okay, as the parent, if I'm going to assume the role of a character or a narrator, which we teach you how to do, so we kind of demystify pretend play and why it's important. But the whole book is not about pretend play. So if you don't like that kind of play, you don't have to sort of be like, oh, now I'm supposed to love pretend. It can feel really annoying and repetitive at times. So I'm just saying, if you wanted to learn to enjoy pretend play more, our book offers you some ideas on how to do that to make it a little bit easier to tolerate that. So once we start to label emotions, then we are free to see what emotional fixes we can come up with. And children have the experience of like dramatizing things and getting real practice in real time, how to deal with emotions in ways that, they're not heavy duty consequences to do with how they choose to deal with that rude person or, the person that might come in and say some mean things and kind of be a bit of a bully or something. So they get practice at how to handle things, almost like doing the soccer practice before the big soccer game, when there's not a real threat and kids feel safe to approach emotions. And while they're feeling those emotions in their body, that's the really like $1 million practice is, can I have a contained experience of my emotions and practice how to deal with them while I'm still having a little bit of that experience? And there's some research that shows that we can, greatly increase their emotional intelligence and their ability to regulate and handle emotions in the moment when they have this kind of contained practice in their play. So it's pretty cool what the drama of play enables us to do with that particular strategy.
Yeah. So what would just take us a little further with that? Like, so you're playing restaurant and your child is pretending to be the angry, rude customer.
Yeah.
Like, just walk us through like a little role play of how a parent might take the next step. You said, oh, this customer seems really angry, but then what would you do just to get a taste of the sort of flavor of it?
So these scenarios give us a chance to decide, am I going to offer my kid a sort of roadmap or some ideas around what you can do about, an angry person, let's say, or if your child is actually feeling a little bit of those angry feelings themselves because they want to be the rude customer and they want to feel, the discomfort, but also the power that anger enables us to feel, right? There's always two sides or more to every emotion, right? So you could decide, well, is my child wanting me to be more of like the character of the chef? And then I play the role of the chef and how the chef could handle the possibility of handling that situation. And what do I want my kid to learn from this experience? But without making it like a didactic kind of, you should do it this way or something. Because remember, this is like improv. So we're seeing like, what's my kid's ability to take on a new solution around their emotion in this moment in time. It might be completely different the next day or the next week or something. They're going through another developmental leap or something just around the corner. Should you play the character of a chef or another customer in the restaurant or something like that? So I might just ask them the question like, oh, should I be the chef in this situation? And then you might put out ideas of well, maybe I could do this, or maybe I could do this, and then just join with those solutions and even share your own emotions as you're going through, wow, I've never had such a difficult customer before. Are they expecting me to whip up an entire banquet in one moment, in one second? I can't just conjure ingredients I don't have. So it's really about using the playfulness to present the solutions to, and then see what your child wants. Oh no, the chef would never say it like that. The chef would do this. Now your child is engaged in this process of dealing with emotions and problem solving around them, and it's completely safe for them. It's not like you're really angry with each other. It's like we're just two characters bantering about this, but it's like a gold mine of skills that we can help them to gain. And if your kid doesn't want you to be the other character, then you can be more of a narrator role, like, wow, I'm just another customer in this restaurant and I'm seeing all this go down, and woo, there's a fire in the kitchen today, kind of thing. And so they're gaining a lot of reflective skills as you're deciding which character am I going to be and how is my character going to approach this problem, and
Yeah,
then
and
solve it together.
from what I remember from when my kids were little, they'll always tell you if you're getting it wrong.
Oh,
No,
well,
you're not another customer. You're the manager or, whatever. And, the other thing I'd like that you mentioned, and I just want to highlight it, is to be careful not to be too like prescriptive and,
yes.
well, the right thing to do here is, and try making sure that even though you are teaching your kids, and this came through in your book, even though you are teaching skills, you're not like there as like the teacher who's going to tell them how it is, right?
Yeah. No, play is really the genius and I don't know, the power position of kids. Like, kids know how to do this quite, I don't know, naturally without anybody having to teach them. And it's still so profound to me, the things that I can learn from kids by the ways that they're engaging in their play. Even as a parent, I see my son working on something, and I don't just mean building a tower with magnet tiles or something. Like, there are struggles that maybe two characters, let's say it's a dog and a cat or whatever, that he's coming up with things that when he's in the heat of the moment, he would not be able to solve that problem in that way in real life. But because he's in a calm and energized state, because we're just playing, it's amazing to see what he's able to achieve. And it doesn't involve a lot of input on my part to sort of tell him what to do, because he's going to be the one to tell me how it's supposed to go. And there's a reason, by the way, you brought that up for me, Sarah. There's a reason why we get it wrong a lot in play. It's because kids can only use solutions that occur to them right then and there in that time frame. And there may be something really specific that they want to work through, like a particular theme around that kind of, moment or story or game that they've devised themselves, that they're just on the cusp of being ready to learn. And so it's actually like a really they titrate how much they can solve in that moment. So if you say, well, I think the chef would come in and just kick everyone out of the restaurant, and they say that's not how it would go. It's because that's not within the realm of the solution that they're looking for in that moment. And I think it's just so beautiful, even if it's a little painful for us. I think it's so beautiful that kids can experience the power of being able to find resolution to things in their play. And it does mean that they need to direct or coach us a little bit to help them get there in the way that they can.
So, two little sidebars that came up for me when you were talking about this is things that I've been asked a lot over the years. One is parents sometimes get, and just I'm curious about your answers from your professional perspective.
Yeah.
And one is that parents get uncomfortable when the kids are always telling them, do this, don't do this, you're doing it wrong, you have to do it this way. And I don't know if it's like ego or if it's that their parents are afraid that that their child's going to grow up to be entitled if they do everything they want in play.
Yeah.
But what's your thought if parents ever say that to you? Like, I don't want my kid to boss me around in play.
Yeah. I think it's important to sort of keep the child at the center. Keep your child at the center of what it is that you're experiencing around this. And also, it's good to be in touch with your feelings about who you are as a player and how you want to play with your child. There is absolutely nothing wrong with saying to your child, I would really enjoy it more if we could play together in this way, right? You're proposing this. I would like to propose this. Is there some way that we can compromise and meet in the middle? Because if you're both not enjoying it, then it becomes really problematic. It feels more like a chore to the parent, I think, and that's my experience professionally, but also as a mom myself. So it's really not about forcing yourself to get on the floor and, drive cars into each other over and over again and things that just don't feel like you're really having a great time when you're playing with your kid. Although we've said like negative emotions can come up in play, and that's completely part of the process of how kids learn while they're playing. But if you're really not enjoying it, then I think it's okay to have a kind of a compromise and say to your kid, I'd really like my character to do this now because, I was feeling like doing that or something. And to see if we can scaffold and stretch. That's another strategy that we offer in the book actually is like, can we build up a child's frustration tolerance and their ability to manage anxiety or uncertainty about what's going to happen next and things like that by inviting them to think in different ways about what they want to play with their parent. I also suggest, finding things that you both enjoy and knowing that it doesn't have to take hours and hours. It could just take a few minutes at a time or something like that to give your kid an experience of connection that's going to, instill all of these qualities and maybe even head off some of the behavior. We also talk about how to use play to head off behaviors that we would find more difficult than getting on the floor and playing for a few minutes. That can often be a preventative dose of positive connection that can take the place of more behavioral pushback later on in the day. If your kid's feeling great because you just, did Magna-Tiles together for a little while, then you're less likely to see, sort of anger and conflict and pushback later on. It's like you've done something for them. Maybe they'll be a little more cooperative with you.
Yeah, that's a nice side benefit.
Yes.
So I'm hearing that the answer is if collaboration is the key really to if you're not enjoying being bossed around by your kid, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't mind it, but you're just a little worried, maybe I shouldn't let them. Is there anything wrong with letting your child really just calling all the shots and telling you, like if it's not bothering you? Or does that question make sense?
Yes, I think if it's not bothering anybody, then let them enjoy and experience all of the, kid level power that play has to offer because there's so many benefits to them having this outlet in their life. It's not just an outlet to build emotional skills. As I said, it's also an outlet where they can release emotions that would maybe later erupt into behavior that we would find more difficult or that we don't want to see. And we cover that in much more detail in the book as well. All of these play strategies can also double up as ways of approaching our kids when they're actually in the middle of having big emotions and having a hard time managing, a bit of a struggle or something like that. So I think there's so much to gain by if it's not bothering anything, let your child have the experience of this kind of control and power for a little while.
Yeah, it's so rare that they do have that control and power in their everyday regular life.
Yes.
You sort of we're sort of getting to the point of resilience, which you talk a lot about in your book, and I want to come back to that. But before we do, I said I was going to ask you to go into one of the strategies that you've mentioned so many of them, but maybe you mentioned that you were going to talk about strategy number 1 in a little bit more detail because you thought that was a good starting place for parents.
Yeah. The way that we start everything off in this, this opportunity to dive deeper into your kids' play or just to feel like you're getting a little bit more out of it than just sitting there and kind of being bored to tears. The first strategy that we cover is called Think Out Loud. And it's really a way to help kids get in the mode of somebody is interested in what I think, and somebody's going to pay attention to my bigger thoughts and feelings and intentions and desires, et cetera, et cetera. So when you just spend a few moments observing and attuning, and then kind of saying out loud what you think your child might be thinking as they're playing. So let's say they're setting up like a castle scene or something, and the night is coming because there's a dragon that's sort of taken over the top tower of the castle or something like that. And you say, well, the knight's going to have to be really brave. Obviously, they are riding all the way across the country to get there. They probably, had to pack a lot of courage to get to this point of fighting the dragon. So you're saying with a little bit more description what your child's experience might be. Something just comes over them, like they light up and they're like, you read my mind. How do you know that? That's exactly what I was thinking. And you don't have to get it right every time to be close enough to just express to your kid, like, I'm paying attention. I care about what you're playing in the first place. And then your kid starts to do it back to you. They'll tell you more. Like, they won't just mindlessly be playing this stuff, but suddenly they can become more mindful of what they're doing and why they're doing it, which is a huge skill for kids to be learning in life, to understand the why behind behavior, which is something Tina Payne-Bryson has taught so many of us. Like, chasing the why is something that we shouldn't just do as parents, but from as young as possible, we can use play to start instilling that reflective ability in our own kids. So by the time they get to a moment where they're the fire-breathing dragon and they're, getting really mad at their sibling or something, or they, feel like tossing the plate of mac and cheese that they don't want to eat because they asked for something different, they are more likely to be a little bit more reflective, to slow down and connect up those parts of the brain that would enable them to sort of stop and think about why they're doing what they're doing. And maybe with a lot of repetition and practice, when they're feeling calm in their play, and with us when we're just talking and teaching them, that they'd be able to do the same thing. So they get a lot of practice in play and they hear it over and over again. They learn to think out loud, and that can almost circumvent the challenges that kids have of being able to express their thoughts calmly and directly with other people. They're not going to be calm all the time, when they're blowing their top. But maybe they would be less blowing their top, or maybe they would be a little bit more capable of reflecting more quickly after the blow up happens, where they go, you know what, it was because of this. This is the reason that I was, so upset. Sorry about that. Those are the kind of kids that I think we're all trying to raise. And sometimes we feel varying levels of success at being able to do that. So that's why we start with the first strategy being about reflection. Reflect with your kid as they're playing, and they'll be more likely to be able to reflect back with you when they're playing or when things really are, blowing up.
Yeah, it all comes down to modeling, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So I just wanted to highlight this too. You mentioned a few minutes ago that, play, you can just do this for a few minutes a day. And I just want to touch on that, how much are we supposed to in quotation marks, how much are we supposed to be playing with our kids? Because I have a feeling there could be some keeners out there that hear this and they think, I'm going to do this for hours every day. But it's also important for kids to play alone too, right?
Yes.
Like, it's not like, this doesn't mean all of this wonderful information doesn't mean that we're putting everything aside and just playing with our kids in all the moments that we can. So maybe just comment on that a little bit.
Absolutely. Everything in moderation, right? So, and I could talk a lot about how much or what types of play I think parents would maybe get the most out of playing with their kids when they're trying to, share some of the benefits of the skills that we teach in the way of play. But really what it comes down to is it's about a quality of way of being. So I would much rather your kid have an engaged, interested parent for a few minutes than a parent who's feeling resentful about being there and largely checked out for hours and hours of time, right? So we are not trying to be prescriptive in the sense that you've got to spend hours doing this and then you'll have the perfect child, because I don't think a perfect child actually exists, nor could we, want to promise that. But the idea is that we're really trying to harness the magic of this specific kind of play, this parent-child, or it doesn't even have to be parent-child. It could be the caregiver that looks after your kids for a few hours after school. It could be the grandparents. It could be a coach. It could be a teacher. We're training lots of different types of adults who are raising and working with kids to use the same way of thinking about play and ways of showing up. So it's really about the way you show up when you're going to play with your kid. But I don't want anybody to go overboard in thinking we're saying now you have to spend hours, that we're like, the American Academy of Pediatrics and we're prescribing a specific number of hours each day or something like that. Kids do need independent, free play. They do need time playing with siblings and peers. They do need time to just be by themselves and explore, get bored and explore what they come up with when there's nothing else to do.
Yeah.
All those things are really important to early development, child development.
Yeah. So even if we could play with them every second of our free time, they do still need those other things that you mentioned. And I think it's important to remember.
Yeah.
So many, there's so many parents who care so much, and sometimes just a little bit of benign neglect, it can be good, right?
Yes. Yeah, and they need some structured activities too, the time that they spend at school or coming home and doing some homework and doing some after-school sports and activities. We're not against those things. We just think that if you create sort of a healthy balance of these things in your kid's life, including time, just a little bit of time playing with you where you're both getting more out of it, I just think more and more families will reap the benefits.
For sure. Okay, well, before I let you go, just let's dive into resilience just a little bit.
Sure.
You talk about it, especially in your step about scaffold and stretch. Maybe you could just give what your definition of resilience, and specifically, I found it interesting in the book how you talked about how sometimes we can get in the way of resilience, and what does all of this have to do with play? I know that's like a 3-part question, but
yes.
What's your definition of resilience? How can parents sometimes get in the way, and how does that tie into play?
Yeah, I think resilience is just being, the way we define it in the book anyway, is just being able to approach challenges and to be able to stick with it long enough to, maybe not even accomplish the full task that's in front of you, but just what is your attitude toward challenges on the whole? Like, are you the kid that sees something that might be tricky or hard to figure out, and you're the one that's going to be sort of persistent with it, and even if you mess up, you'll think about it for a little bit or ask for some help because you don't have to do it all by yourself, and you'll try it again and you'll come back and you'll feel a little stronger for it. Like, I think, to me, like, if I was just going to encapsulate it really quickly, those are kids that I see as being more resilient than the child that's going to feel like, I don't think I should even try. Or if I start to struggle, I'm going to hand it over to the adult right away. Like, here, can you help me with this? Or can you do most of it for me? And I think, sometimes those kids are really worried about a perception that somebody else might have of them, that they're not capable, and that leads them to feel a little less capable themselves. That can lead to some patterns of anxiety sometimes, or being a little more susceptible to stress. But some stress is a good thing for kids, and they will definitely encounter what we hope are manageable levels of stress even when they're playing. So if you're trying to open the glue bottle because the glue is stuck and it won't squeeze out when you're trying to make like this whole popsicle stick creation, or you try and squeeze the glue bottle and the whole lid pops off and glue sprays everywhere, how are you going to handle that? Those little moments of like the ability to build grit and resilience, and an adult who's with you, your parent, gauging how much support should I give in order to scaffold a skill that you could learn or the resilience that you could build in this moment, versus like, how much am I going to lay off and kind of let you stretch your abilities and learn to emotionally tolerate a little bit of distress or stress? That's actually a good thing for kids, and we can practice that in their play too. When it's just a popsicle stick build, it's not, whether or not they got an A on the calculus test or something. A little bit of risk is good, especially when it's just play.
So it's a little bit similar to what we were talking about in the beginning in terms of the big feelings that come up it's a little bit less emergency feeling maybe in the
Yes.
play, and that
Yeah.
they have more opportunities to work out their frustrations.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that letting them work through frustrations and play is kind of like resilience first aid and resilience building for the future.
Yeah.
So we sort of suggest to parents, and you don't have to do this all the time. Sometimes you can just jump in to help. But some parents are sort of led from this. And I do this too with my own kid, where he's like, Mom, I can't get these Legos apart. And I know that he's just on the verge of either having a meltdown about it or he's going to like throw the Legos, that there's going to be some disaster that's more risky than just helping him. And here, let me have it and I'll just do it for you kind of thing. But just to wait a second and almost be more of your child's assistant or their coach through the experience, rather than jumping in and just doing it for them, I often feel like there's like a knee-jerk reaction, or maybe it's just us too. I can be a bit of a perfectionist, so I want things done in a certain way. And so my perfectionism can lead me to be like, no, it's not like that. It's like this. Here, let me show you. And that can like lead our kids sometimes to take on maybe more of a, I don't know, I can't do this. Why don't you do this for me sort of thing. And it just becomes how we relate to each other. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So to say to my son, like, oh, so you tried using your fingers to open the Lego, and I'd rather you not use your teeth to split these Legos apart, right? So we're not going to let them do things that might be harmful or something in the interest of having them scaffold and stretch new skills and build resilience. But the idea is like, if I stand there and let's look at this together. Let's take an extra beat. Oh, I noticed that when you put your fingernail under this corner, it came off a little bit more than if you just try and yank the whole thing off. What do you think about that? And so it's really about kind of getting into the micro a little bit in those moments where he might go, oh yeah, I can do that. And then he just pulls it off as if he thought of the idea himself and I had nothing to do with it. That's gold. Like for a kid to end on a note of, I figured it out all by myself. Look, Mom, look, Dad, check me out. That's what builds resilience in the long term because they're taking on experiences of, I got this, like, yes, somebody helped me, but these were the steps that I took to figure it out. And when they can keep those steps, then that becomes like a little snowball of grit. We talk about the snowball of resilience, like the next time they approach maybe a bigger challenge or something, that becomes an implicit memory that they can figure things out and they can like break things down into smaller steps so they can look at it from a different angle and maybe they'll be able to find another way.
Totally.
That way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always talk about, that the small problems of small children are like the training wheels for resilience as they get older, right? Like
yeah.
you can't expect someone to have resilience when they're older about the big problems unless they've been able to be upset and work through it about the small problems when they're small.
Yes, I love that. And then, it makes me think as my kid has gotten older and when I see families when their kids are little and we've worked together so long that they're now teenagers, like I want my kid to come to me when they're like, I don't know how to prepare for this exam. Can you help me figure this out? Or, I really like this person and I want to ask them to the homecoming dance, but I don't know if they're going to say yes. Or do you know what I mean? Like as they get older and eventually they're going to go off maybe to college or have their first job or go through a breakup or something like that. And we talk about this in the book, like I still want to be able to be my kid's assistant without taking over and helicoptering them and making them less capable. But I want them to know that I'm emotionally available to them so that we can sort through it together. And that just adds on to the resilience we were starting to build when they were little. So
it definitely happens. One of my sons who's away at university, but in the same city that we live, he doesn't live at home. And
yeah,
about a couple months ago, he texted me and said, Mom, are you going to be home tonight? And I said, yeah. And he said, I need to come over and talk to you about this big decision that he was going to break up with some. He said, I need to come over and talk to you about this. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be home. But yeah, it definitely still happens. And it was funny because he'd already worked it through in his mind. He just needed someone to bounce his ideas off of. So it definitely, it does happen.
Yeah, you were just verifying that he had worked through the
Yeah.
steps
Yeah.
well on his own and that he was gonna be able to do the final hard
Yeah.
step of,
Yeah.
completing that relationship, which
Yeah.
is, oh,
Yeah.
very
And those,
tricky.
those are the big problems that to get bigger when they're bigger, right?
Yes, but how gratifying it must have been, I don't know, as a parent to see, he has the building blocks, so that these are things that you've worked on with him all along, and he was able to do most of it by himself. He just needed you for that last little bit of reassurance at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. It
It's
makes me feel
amazing.
good. I did
Yeah.
screenshot that text. Want to save it forever.
Oh, yeah, you
So
should.
thank you so much for joining us. This book, I mean, we could talk all day about all of the great
Mm.
strategies that are in here. And, there are things that we didn't even get to talk about that I think parents will want to know, like, what to do when the play stops. You had some great ideas there for helping kids who don't want the play to stop.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to end by asking you the question and don't forget, we're going to for everyone who's listening, we're going to put the link to pre-order the book in the show notes. And obviously you can just look up The Way of Play wherever you buy books if you can't figure out how to find the link in the show notes. So before I let you go, the question that I ask all my guests, which is, if you could go back in time to your younger parent self, what
Oh.
advice would you give yourself? And it can have to do with anything. It doesn't have to do with play.
Oh my gosh. That is such a good question. So go back in time to my younger parent self. What advice would I have given a slightly younger, less wrinkled Georgie when my kid was little? I think it would be, don't worry that he's walking around a park grabbing the biggest stick he can find and hitting everything trees and bushes and rocks and all this stuff with this big stick. There was meaning in that I now understand better. The things that I worried about when he was little, those things are going to be actually okay. Not that he just is going to grow out of those, but there were new things that I had yet to discover about my kid and his sensory profile and the things that he was learning developmentally that didn't make sense to me when I was younger. But I was reflecting on this the other day, that there's an explanation and a meaning behind every aspect of our kids' behavior, and that it's important to their development, and that how I choose to respond as a parent that can bring us closer is the big thing.
Love that.
The most
Sounds
important
like
thing.
you're talking about trust.
Yeah.
Trust rather than fear of what's
Yeah.
going on with your child in the process that
Yeah.
they're going through. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Thank
best
you.
place to go for listeners to find out more about the book, what you do, your organization.
Yeah, we have a ton of resources on our website for the Play Strong Institute, and that's just playstronginstitute.com. Play Strong stands for the strategies that we cover in The Way of Play, but we chose not to call it Play Strong because we really wanted parents to see this as becoming a way of being with your child, taking on that playful quality in your parenting. But the institute is called playstronginstitute.com.
Great. Perfect. And we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Georgie.
Great. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.